I was 17 when my dad remarried. It had been just the two of us for a long time, ever since my mom passed away when I was 11. Losing her had been the hardest thing in the world, and for years, our house had felt quiet. Too quiet. It wasn't perfect, but at least it was familiar. My dad and I had developed our own routines, our own way of living. We weren't particularly emotional people, but we understood each other in an unspoken way. Then Lisa came into the picture. Dad met her through work. She was a real estate agent and he was an accountant for a small firm that handled financial planning for local businesses. According to him, their relationship progressed quickly. One minute he was casually mentioning her name over dinner, the next they were engaged. I had only met her a handful of times before she officially became my stepmother, and in those interactions she had been polite but distant. I figured she was just the kind of person who wasn't great with kids, even though she had two of her own. Her kids, Emily and Josh, were younger than me, 14 and 12. When Dad announced that they would be moving into our house after the wedding, I wasn't thrilled, but I told myself I could deal with it. I wasn't a little kid anymore. I had my own life, my own priorities. I would be out of the house in a year or two for college, and then it wouldn't really matter. What I hadn't realized was how much Lisa planned to change things. From the moment she and her kids moved in, it was like my home wasn't mine anymore. She wasted no time redecorating, changing the living room furniture, repainting the kitchen, and even rearranging the layout of the house. She acted like she was bringing order to some neglected space, but it had never felt neglected to me. Every decision was made without asking me. My mom's old things were put away in storage, little personal touches she had left behind erased one by one. I tried not to let it get to me. I told myself it was just furniture, just paint, but the reality was that it wasn't just about the house. It was about control. Lisa had moved in and immediately positioned herself as the one in charge. She set new house rules that only seemed to apply to me. No eating in my room. No staying out past 10, even though I had never broken curfew before. No having friends over without asking her permission first. Meanwhile, Emily and Josh could do whatever they wanted. If I spoke up about the double standards, Lisa would just smile and say, "We're a family now. I expect you to set a good example." Dad, for his part, tried to keep the peace. He was clearly happy to have a partner again, and I didn't blame him for that, but his usual easygoing attitude made it impossible for him to stand up to Lisa. Anytime I pushed back against her new rules, he would say things like, "Just go along with it, all right? It's not a big deal." Or, "Lisa's just trying to make things comfortable for everyone." Comfortable for who? I started spending more time outside the house. After school, I would hang out at a friend's place or go to the library just to avoid being home. I couldn't relax there anymore. Lisa's presence loomed over everything, and I knew that if I was in the house for too long, she would find something to criticize. Then, about 2 months after she moved in, Lisa called me into the kitchen and dropped a bombshell. I had just gotten home from school, exhausted from a long day, when she told me to sit down. She was standing by the counter with a stack of papers in front of her. I immediately felt uneasy. "I wanted to have a discussion with you about household responsibilities," she said in that overly sweet tone she used when she was about to say something condescending. "Now that we're all living together, it's only fair that everyone contributes." I nodded warily, waiting for the catch. She picked up one of the papers and slid it across the counter toward me. "I've done some budgeting, and I think it makes sense for you to start paying rent. Nothing outrageous, just $500 a month." I stared at her, thinking I must have misheard. "Wait, what?" "500 a month," she repeated, as if it was a completely reasonable request. "Since you're almost an adult, it's important that you learn how to be responsible. Paying rent is a normal part of life, and I think it's time you start preparing for the real world." I was stunned into silence. I was 17. I was still in high school. I didn't have a job because my dad had always told me to focus on my studies, and now Lisa expected me to somehow cough up $500 a month just to live in my own home? "But this is my house," I finally said, still struggling to wrap my head around it. Lisa's smile didn't falter. "It's your father's house, and as his wife, I help manage household finances now. It's not unreasonable. I mean, you use electricity, you eat food, you take up space. I don't think it's fair that your father and I have to cover everything while you just live here for free." I clenched my fists under the table. I'm in high school. How am I supposed to make that kind of money? You can get a part-time job, she said easily. Plenty of teenagers work while they're in school. It builds character. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had lived in this house my entire life. My mom had decorated these rooms. My childhood memories were tied to every inch of this place, and now, this woman, who had been here for barely 2 months, was trying to charge me rent? Does Dad know about this? I asked, my voice tight. Lisa's expression darkened just slightly, like she hadn't expected me to push back. Your father and I have discussed it, and he agrees that it's a good idea. I didn't believe that for a second. My dad wasn't perfect, but he wasn't cruel. He wouldn't make me pay rent when I didn't even have a source of income. Lisa was doing this, and she was using my dad's name to justify it. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the tile floor. I need to talk to him, I said, my voice shaking. Lisa crossed her arms. He's busy right now, but I expect your first payment by the 1st of the month. I walked out without another word, my mind spinning. There was no way I was going to pay her, but more than that, something about this whole situation felt wrong. Lisa had no claim over this house, and yet she was acting like she was in charge. She was treating me like some unwanted tenant, instead of a member of the family. That night after Lisa went to bed, I sat in my room and thought back to something my mom had once told me when I was little. If anything ever happens to me, she had said, just remember, you'll always have a home here, no matter what. A sinking feeling formed in my gut. I needed to find out the truth about this house. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lisa's words kept replaying in my head, her smug expression as she told me I needed to pay rent, her condescending tone when she said it was time for me to learn responsibility. It made my blood boil. The worst part wasn't even the demand itself. It was the fact that she thought she could force me to do it. She had been living in my house for barely 2 months, and already she was acting like she was the landlord. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. There was something off about all of this. Lisa talked like she and my dad owned the house together, like they had equal say in what happened here. But they didn't. This wasn't her house, and I was starting to think it might not even be my dad's either. I remembered my mom's words from years ago. You'll always have a home here, no matter what. At the time, I had thought she was just reassuring me, but now I wasn't so sure. I got out of bed quietly, careful not to make any noise. Lisa was a light sleeper, and the last thing I needed was for her to wake up and start questioning me. I tiptoed to my closet, reaching for the old metal box I kept on the top shelf. It was dented and scratched, something my mom had given me when I was little to store important things. Over the years, I had stuffed it with birthday cards, childhood drawings, and little keepsakes from my mom. I sat on the floor and opened the box, my fingers digging through the old papers inside. There had to be something. Anything that could confirm what I was starting to suspect. And then I found it. It was an old manila envelope, yellowed with age, buried under a stack of photos. My heart pounded as I pulled it out and flipped it over. My mom's handwriting was scrawled across the front in black ink. I swallowed hard. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and pulled out the documents inside. The first thing I saw was a deed. The deed to the house. And my name was on it. I blinked, rereading it several times to make sure I wasn't imagining things. My mom's name was there too, listed as the previous owner. And in the fine print at the bottom, there it was. Upon her passing, full ownership of the house was transferred to me. I wasn't just living here. I owned it. I let out a slow, shaky breath. My chest felt tight, like I had just been punched in the gut. This changed everything. Lisa had no right to demand rent from me. She had no authority over the house at all. And my dad? I frowned, my stomach twisting. Did Dad know? I tried to think back. After my mom died, I had been too young to care about legal documents or property ownership. I had just assumed that the house belonged to my dad, that he had inherited everything. But if that were true, why would my mom go out of her way to put my name on the deed instead? I flipped through the other documents in the envelope. There were legal papers, including a copy of my mom's will. My eyes scanned the text quickly, and my suspicions were confirmed. She had intentionally left the house to me. My dad was named as my legal guardian and trustee of the property while I was a minor, meaning he could manage things until I turned 18. But technically, the house had been mine since the day she passed, which meant Lisa had no idea what she was talking about. For the first time in weeks, I smiled. The next morning, I walked downstairs feeling lighter. I still had to figure out how to handle this, but knowing the truth gave me a sense of power I hadn't felt since Lisa moved in. Lisa was in the kitchen, sipping coffee like she owned the place. She glanced up when she saw me. "Good morning," she said with that fake sweetness she always used when she was about to be condescending. "I hope you've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday." I smiled, setting my backpack down on the counter. "Oh, I have." She raised an eyebrow. "And?" "And I won't be paying rent," I said simply. Lisa's expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. She let out a short, amused laugh like I was a naive child who didn't understand how the world worked. "Sweetheart, I don't think you understand how serious this is. If you want to live under this roof, you have to contribute. That's just how things work in the real world." I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice just enough to make sure she paid attention. "Then it's a good thing this roof belongs to me." For the first time since I had met her, Lisa looked genuinely caught off guard. I reached into my backpack, pulled out the envelope, and slid it across the counter toward her. "This is the deed to the house," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's in my name. My mom left it to me when she passed away." Lisa didn't move at first. Then slowly, she reached for the envelope and pulled out the papers. I watched her eyes scan the text, her face paling as she read. "You've been acting like you own this place," I continued. "But you don't. And if anyone should be paying rent here, it's you." Lisa's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time since she moved in, she didn't seem to have a smug comeback. I leaned back, crossing my arms. "Unless you want to explain why you're demanding money from the actual owner of the house?" She slammed the papers down on the counter, her expression tight. "Does your father know about this?" I tilted my head. "That's a good question. Why don't we ask him?" At that exact moment, as if on cue, my dad walked into the kitchen. He glanced between us, sensing the tension. "What's going on?" Lisa shot me a warning look, silently daring me to keep my mouth shut. But I wasn't scared of her anymore. "Dad," I said, keeping my eyes on him, "did you know that Mom left the house to me?" My dad frowned. "What?" I slid the deed toward him. He picked it up, his brows furrowing as he read. Lisa folded her arms. "This is ridiculous. I mean, legally, yes, but he's still your guardian." "Yeah," I cut in, "which means he can manage the house, but he doesn't own it, I do." I turned back to my dad. "Did you forget about this, or did you just never tell me?" He exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. Honestly, I forgot. When your mom passed, I was handling so many things. The house was always just our home, so I never thought about the legal side of it." He sighed. "But yeah, looking at this, it's clear. The house is yours." Lisa looked furious. "So what does that mean? He just gets to live here for free?" Dad turned to her, his voice suddenly sharper. "He's my son, and this is his home. We are not charging him rent." Lisa opened her mouth, then snapped it shut. I could see the realization dawning on her. She had no power here. I picked up my backpack and slung it over my shoulder. Glad we cleared that up. Then I walked out the door, leaving Lisa standing there, speechless. I walked out of the kitchen that morning feeling victorious, but I knew it wasn't over. Lisa wasn't the type to back down easily. She had spent months asserting herself as the head of the household, controlling every little detail of our daily lives. The idea that she had no real power over me, or the house, must have been eating her up inside. I could see it in the way her face had gone pale when she read the deed, in the tight clench of her jaw as my dad confirmed the truth. Still, part of me hoped that now that she knew the truth, she would let it go. Maybe, just maybe, she would accept reality and move on. But deep down, I knew better. Lisa wasn't just going to accept that she had no authority over me. She was going to fight it. And that fight started that very night. I had been in my room doing homework when I heard a knock at my door. Not a polite knock, an impatient, rhythmic tapping that already set me on edge. I sighed, pushing my textbook aside. What? Lisa didn't wait for an invitation. She opened the door and stepped inside, closing it behind her. I looked up at her, unimpressed. Do you not understand how knocking works? She ignored the comment. We need to talk, she said, folding her arms. I leaned back in my chair. Pretty sure we already did that this morning. Lisa's lips pressed into a thin line. Listen, I get that you think you won some kind of battle today, but this isn't over. I sighed. Lisa, I don't think I won anything. I just pointed out the legal reality of the situation. The house belongs to me. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. She took a step closer, lowering her voice. You may legally own it, but you're still a child. You don't have a job, you don't pay bills, and you don't even know what it takes to maintain a house. Your father and I handle everything. We pay the mortgage, the utilities, the groceries. I cut her off with a laugh. The mortgage? There is no mortgage. The house was paid off years ago. And the bills? Yeah, my dad pays them. You don't contribute a dime. So don't act like you're doing me some big favor by letting me stay in my own house. Her face twisted in frustration, but I wasn't done. In fact, I continued, since you're so worried about money, maybe you should be the one paying rent. After all, you and your kids are the only ones living here for free. Lisa's nostrils flared. That's ridiculous. Is it? I asked, tilting my head. I mean, you were all set to charge me $500 a month. Why shouldn't I charge you the same? She scoffed. You don't have the authority to do that. I smirked. I own the house. I have the authority to do whatever I want with it. For the first time, I saw a flicker of something behind her eyes. Fear. She was starting to realize just how little power she actually had. But Lisa wasn't done scheming. She took a deep breath, composing herself. Then she gave me a tight, forced smile. All right, she said, her tone suddenly softer. I can see we got off on the wrong foot today. Let's start over. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? She sighed dramatically, as if she were the mature one and I was the unreasonable child. Look, I know things have been tense since I moved in, but I really do want this family to work. I don't want us to be at odds. I stared at her, waiting for the catch. So, she continued, forcing another smile, why don't we come to an agreement? You don't have to pay rent. But in return, you start respecting the rules of the house. My rules. I laughed out loud. Oh, no, that's not how this works. Her smile faltered. Excuse me? You don't get to negotiate with me, Lisa. You don't have any leverage. The house isn't yours. You can make all the rules you want, but I don't have to follow any of them. Her eyes narrowed. I am your stepmother. I shrugged. And? That doesn't give you any legal authority over me or this house. You're just the woman my dad married. Lisa's mask slipped, her face twisted in anger. You little... She stopped herself, taking a deep breath before forcing a smile again. I see. So you're just going to be disrespectful then. I'm just being honest, I said. You don't get to control me. You don't get to tell me what to do in my own house. And you sure as hell don't get to demand money from me. Lisa was seething, but she knew she had lost this argument. Without another word, she turned and stormed out of my room, slamming the door behind her. I let out a breath, feeling the tension in my shoulders ease. But I knew Lisa wasn't done. For the next few days, Lisa gave me the silent treatment. No snide comments, no passive-aggressive remarks. Just cold, icy silence. It was a welcome relief. But I knew she was just planning her next move. And sure enough, it came at the end of the week. I walked into the kitchen one morning to find my dad sitting at the table, looking exhausted. Lisa was standing behind him, her arms crossed. She had a smug look on her face, like she had already won whatever battle she was about to start. Sit down, my dad said, rubbing his temples. We need to talk. I sat, already knowing where this was going. Lisa cleared her throat, putting on her fake concerned tone. Your father and I have been discussing your behavior lately, and we think it's time for some changes. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? Dad sighed. Lisa thinks. He hesitated, glancing at her. We think it would be best if you found somewhere else to stay after you graduate. I stared at him. What? Lisa chimed in, pretending to be sympathetic. We just think it's important for you to learn independence. You know, get out into the real world, learn to support yourself. It'll be good for you. I folded my arms. Let me get this straight. You tried to make me pay rent, found out I own the house, and now you want me to move out? Lisa's smile was sickeningly sweet. It's just time for you to spread your wings, sweetheart. I turned to my dad. And you agree with this? He looked uncomfortable, but he didn't argue. I let out a short laugh. You really think you can kick me out of my own house? Lisa's smile faltered. I leaned forward. I'm not going anywhere. But if you don't like living here, Lisa, you're welcome to leave. Her face twisted in fury, but she had no comeback. Because she knew I was right. She had lost. The days following that conversation were tense. Lisa was furious, but for once she didn't have an immediate way to fight back. She had tried to push me out of my house, and I had made it clear that wasn't happening. She knew she couldn't force me, and that fact ate away at her. Dad, on the other hand, was caught in the middle. I could tell he felt guilty about the way things had played out, but he also wasn't doing much to fix it. He avoided confrontation, just like always. That was his biggest weakness. He would rather let Lisa do whatever she wanted than stand up to her and risk an argument. But I wasn't like him. Lisa might have been willing to wait me out, but I wasn't about to let her continue living in my house while making my life miserable. I was done letting her act like she ran things. It was time for her to leave. A few nights later, I heard Lisa on the phone in the living room. She was speaking in a hushed voice, but I could tell she was frustrated. Don't know why he's being so difficult. It's not like he even pays for anything. He just sits in that house and does whatever he wants, and I'm supposed to act like that's normal? I stopped in the hallway, listening. I don't care what the deed says, she hissed. I need him out of here. If he won't leave willingly, we'll have to find another way. My stomach twisted. Another way? I walked into the room, making sure my footsteps were loud enough that she heard me. She immediately turned, her face shifting from frustration to fake politeness in a split second. Oh, didn't see you there, she said, tucking her phone away. I folded my arms. Who were you talking to? Lisa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just a friend. I nodded slowly. A friend who's helping you figure out how to get me out of my own house? Her smile tightened. Don't be ridiculous. I heard you, Lisa. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You're still trying to find a way to push me out, even after everything. Lisa exhaled dramatically, as if she were the victim here. Look, I just think it's unhealthy for you to still be living here. It's not normal for an almost adult to be clinging to their childhood home. You need to start thinking about the future. I tilted my head. And let me guess, you and your kids would be happy to stay in this childhood home once I leave? She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. I smirked. Yeah, that's what I thought. That conversation was the last straw. I had been patient. I had given Lisa multiple chances to back off. But she had made it clear, as long as she was here, she would never stop trying to take control. So I decided to do something about it. The next morning, while Lisa was out running errands, I sat down with my dad. Dad, I said, keeping my voice calm, we need to talk. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Is this about Lisa again? I nodded. Yeah, and I'm done pretending things are fine. She's still trying to push me out of the house. He looked uncomfortable. She just wants what's best for you. I scoffed. No, she doesn't. She wants what's best for her. She wants me gone so she can take over completely, and you know it. Dad didn't answer. He just stared at the table, looking exhausted. I exhaled. I've put up with a lot since she moved in. I've tried to be patient. I even let it go when she demanded I pay rent for a house that isn't even hers. I looked him in the eye. But I'm not letting her stay here anymore. Dad's head snapped up. What? You heard me. I'm done. I pulled out the deed to the house. The same one I had shown Lisa days ago. and placed it on the table between us. Legally, this house is mine, and I'm making a decision. Lisa needs to leave. Dad looked stunned. You can't just kick her out. Yes, I can, I said firmly. She's not on the deed. She doesn't own any part of this house. And if she refuses to go willingly, I'll file a formal eviction notice. I already looked it up. Dad stared at me like he didn't recognize me. You would really do that? It gave me no choice. I leaned forward. Dad, she's been manipulating you since the day she moved in. You don't have to put up with this. We don't have to put up with this. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then, finally, he sighed. You're serious about this? I nodded. He ran a hand over his face, looking more tired than ever. This is going to be a disaster. Maybe, I admitted, but it'll be better than letting her take over our lives. Dad didn't argue. He just sat there, staring. I expected Lisa to fight back when she found out. I expected screaming, manipulation, maybe even threats. But when I finally told her she had 2 weeks to leave, she just laughed. You really think your dad is going to let you do this? She sneered. He's my husband. He'll take my side. I shrugged. Guess we'll find out. Her confidence faltered. She must have realized that if Dad had already agreed to this, her position was a lot weaker than she thought. Over the next few days, she tried everything. She tried guilt, telling my dad that kicking her out would destroy their marriage. She tried anger, accusing me of breaking up the family and calling me selfish. She even tried bargaining, offering to compromise if I let her stay. But I didn't budge, and to my surprise, neither did Dad. Maybe, deep down, he had known all along that Lisa wasn't good for us. Maybe he was just relieved that I was the one forcing the decision so he didn't have to. Either way, when Lisa finally realized she had lost, she really lost it. She screamed, she cried, she packed her things, angrily slamming doors and muttering about how ungrateful we were. But in the end, she laughed, and the house felt lighter without her. After Lisa was gone, things didn't magically go back to normal. My dad and I still had a lot to work through. I was still frustrated with him for letting things get this bad, and he had to come to terms with the fact that he had made some really bad choices. But for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The house was finally mine again, not just legally, but emotionally. Lisa had come in and tried to take over, but in the end, she lost. Because no matter how much she demanded control, the truth had always been simple. She was just a guest in my home.